They dragged Marcus out of the grain mill at noon, still in his work gloves, the red dust from the corn silos clinging to his face like blood. All he had done was ask why he was paid less than the white men beside him. The sirens came slow, as if reluctant to interrupt the heat. It was early July 2018, the kind of day in Alabama when the air felt like boiled syrup and every breath reminded you of what it meant to be stuck in a place built on silence and scorched fields. The tariffs had hit hard. Cotton and soy were piling up in warehouses like unsent letters, but nothing piled higher than resentment. Marcus Duval was 27, the youngest foreman the Lenox grain mill had ever seen and the first black one. He had risen fast, too fast for some, even though he worked twice as hard. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words came slow and clear, like scripture read off the back of a shovel. He'd asked a question in the break room, quietly, no shouting, just that slow, level tone. Why is Billy earning $3 more an hour when he been here half the time I have? Billy, red-faced and twice Marcus's size, had snorted, wiped his mouth with a powdered sugar donut napkin, and said, "Maybe it's 'cause I don't run my mouth like you do." 15 minutes later, Marcus was in the dirt, knees grinding against gravel, as two deputies pressed his head toward the concrete like they were trying to force the truth out of him. The charge? Disturbing the peace. The real reason? Daring to speak. Back in town, the news didn't spread. It seeped. Through barbershop whispers, through the flickering televisions and fried chicken joints, through long, quiet looks exchanged at gas stations. And in the middle of it all stood Pastor Eleanor May. She wasn't the kind of pastor who wore robes. Her Sunday dress was the same one she wore to funerals and weddings, gray with small blue flowers. But her words could part water. She had buried too many boys and prayed over too many mothers to stay quiet now. She found Marcus in county jail, bruised but unbowed. "You ready to raise hell, baby?" she asked, eyes shining like rivers in flood. He nodded. "I'm done kneeling unless I'm praying." The courtroom smelled of old wood and older lies. Judge Stanley K. Mercer, a man who'd served since Reagan, sat like a king behind the bench. He had a face carved from bitterness and hair as white as the powdered wigs he likely wished were still legal. Marcus stood beside an overworked public defender who hadn't asked him a single question before the hearing. Then the doors opened. Pastor Eleanor walked in, flanked by two young lawyers from Montgomery. Behind them came a dozen men and women from the neighborhood. Then 2 dozen. Then 40. The judge adjusted his glasses. "What is this, a parade?" "No, Your Honor," said Eleanor, stepping forward. "It's a congregation, and we came to watch justice burn or bloom." The morning after the funeral, something cracked in Jeremiah. Not with the violence of thunder, but with the soft finality of dry earth breaking underfoot. Grief had its ways, and this time, it crept in like kudzu, slow, persistent, wrapping around everything that had once stood tall inside him. His grandfather's burial had been brief and quiet. The family preacher whispered scripture over the coffin, while distant cranes flapped overhead, like they knew this part of Alabama too well. There was no headline, no cameras. Just the weight of loss pressing into the soil beside the man who had taught him about justice by naming every tree and stone that once served as witness to wrong. Back at the farmhouse, Jeremiah sat on the porch swing with his fingers pressed together, listening to the hush between crickets. The cotton field stretched like a graveyard of memories, and he could almost hear his grandfather's voice in the wind. "They count us when it's convenient. But our names? They bury those." His mother brought him coffee, her hands trembling. "You going back to Montgomery?" she asked. He nodded. "The hearing's in 3 days. I can't let it drop." She hesitated. "You know what they'll say, that it's not about color. It's about crime. Same thing they always say." Jeremiah didn't flinch. "Then I'll say what they won't. I'll say his name." Montgomery buzzed with a strange energy that week. Outside the courthouse, protest signs bloomed like wildflowers in the cracks of the pavement. Some signs read, "Justice for Walter." Others bore the phrase, "Tariffs can't silence truth." But most carried just a single name, Samuel Glenn, the boy who'd been sentenced for a theft he never committed, whose family had since vanished into debt. Jeremiah met with Layla Jennings, a civil rights attorney with fire in her voice and sleep in her eyes. She had taken on Samuel's appeal after local defenders backed away, citing political pressure. They stacked the charges, she said. Retail theft, resisting arrest, loitering, all for walking into a store while black. And now, Jeremiah asked, they're delaying the appeal, blaming tariffs for budget cuts in the courts. It's absurd. Jeremiah leaned back in the chair. You think this judge will play fair? Layla laughed bitterly. Judge Redfield was appointed last year. He's on record calling Black Lives Matter a marketing scam. Jeremiah closed his eyes. Then we bring the truth to the steps. If we can't get justice inside, we build it outside. The night before the hearing, Jeremiah visited Samuel's old neighborhood. The houses leaned on each other like survivors. Kids played basketball in a patch of light beneath a flickering street lamp. A woman named Laverne opened her door when he knocked. You the one stirring all this up? She asked, arms crossed. I'm trying to clear his name, Jeremiah said. Laverne studied him. Good, 'cause Samuel never stole a damn thing. He brought groceries home to my sister the day they said he looted that store. Would you say that publicly? I'll scream it if you put a mic in my hand, Jeremiah smiled. Then let's get you a microphone. At dawn, the courthouse steps filled with people, not just black folks. Old white men in denim overalls, young Latinas with strollers, pastors, veterans, teenagers with cell phones on live stream. They came because something in the system was broken, and for once, someone had said the names out loud. Inside, the courtroom was colder. Judge Redfield presided with a smirk that never quite left his lips. Layla stood with steel in her spine, reciting the timeline of Samuel's innocence. But the prosecution moved like shadows, vague and dismissive, more concerned with ending the hearing than finding the truth. Jeremiah watched from the gallery, jaw tight. When Layla finished, the judge exhaled through his nose. We'll reconvene next month, perhaps when the economy is more stable. Gasps. Anger. And then Jeremiah stood. Your Honor, he said, voice calm but thunderous. How many names must we wade through before justice becomes affordable again? Redfield scowled. You are not permitted to speak. But Jeremiah kept going. Samuel Glenn, Walter Tillman, Jamal Rivers, my grandfather Isaiah. Names you never learned because the system never bothered to remember them. Guards moved. The judge banged the gavel. But something had shifted. The people in the pews stood too, saying the names, one by one, louder each time, until it wasn't just noise. It was history clawing its way to the surface. It started with a letter, folded into thirds, slid under the office door of Eyes on Justice. No return address, just a name written on lined paper, Marcus J. Benton. Lisa opened it slowly. Inside were photocopies, school reports, court transcripts, and a grainy photo of a boy no older than 15. The handwriting was shaky but urgent. He was mine. Judge Hanlon gave him 6 years for a pocket knife. He never came home. The weight of the letter silenced the room. That day, Lisa, Elijah, and Harold began cross-referencing names, charges, sentencing dates. What had started as 19 cases now swelled to 36, then 42. Each name another shingle on the roof of injustice. Elijah couldn't sleep. At night he sat on the porch with his journal, writing down each name like a prayer. Each boy a thread in a tapestry torn too soon. He no longer saw himself as the center of the story, but as a vessel, a messenger for those whose voices had been buried. One afternoon, Lisa brought news. We found a pattern in the sentencing algorithm Hanlon used, she said. He manipulated judicial discretion thresholds always to the maximum, always targeting the same demographics. Elijah nodded. We need the data made public. Already working on it, Harold replied. But we'll face blowback. And they did. Online forums called Elijah a fraud. News pundits labeled the movement a racial witch hunt. Old footage was dug up Elijah at a protest. Elijah mouthing off to a campus officer. Elijah refusing to stand during a national anthem. They painted him as angry, dangerous, ungrateful. But what they didn't show was Elijah helping his mother clean churches at AM, or tutoring his cousin through geometry, or how he stayed late to clean up after every Eyes on Justice meeting. Then, the phone rang. Lisa picked up. Her face turned to stone. Judge Hanlon filed an injunction. He's suing Elijah for defamation and emotional distress. Harold slammed his hand on the table. He's scared. Good. Elijah leaned forward. Then let him be scared. The courthouse filled on the day of the hearing. News crews, counter-protesters, families holding signs with their sons' names. It wasn't a trial, it was theater. And every actor knew their part. Inside, Elijah sat upright, calm. When Hanlon entered, flanked by attorneys, the room went still. No road this time. Just a man. A man who looked smaller without his bench. The judge's attorney spoke first, citing Elijah's public statements as libel. My client has suffered reputational harm, threats, and undue stress. Lisa stood. With respect, the only thing Judge Hanlon has suffered is accountability. We have evidence, testimonies, documents, and one young man brave enough to bring it all to light. Then Elijah took the stand. He told his story again, but this time, not just as a victim, as a witness. A witness to patterns, to prejudice, to the way silence protects power. I don't want revenge, he said, eyes steady. I want restoration. I want every child who sat before him to be seen. The room was quiet when he finished. Not empty, not hostile, just quiet like the breath before a bell tolls. The judge didn't win the injunction. The case was dismissed. But Elijah didn't smile. Not yet. Because this wasn't about one win. It was about turning silence into testimony. And the bell had only just begun to ring. Weeks passed, but the fire didn't dim. The courthouse, once a fortress of certainty, now stood like a question mark etched in stone. Murals began to appear on its brick exterior, faces of young boys, their eyes soft and watching, painted by local artists who'd once been silent. Silence was no longer the norm. Not here. Elijah sat in the back of a town hall meeting, listening. Parents stood to tell their stories. A man named Curtis recounted how his son, Jamal, had been given 10 years for breaking into an abandoned car. He's 30 now, Curtis said, voice trembling. And he still talks about that courtroom like it was a prison before the prison. Elijah stood to speak. We are the generation meant to remember. And remembering doesn't mean pain, it means purpose. Harold launched a public database, a searchable archive of every case under Hanlon's tenure. It spread like wildfire, shared across platforms, screens, kitchen tables. People scrolled through names like sacred scripture. Mothers wept when they found their sons. Some couldn't even speak. Lisa met with state attorneys. She brought binders, thumb drives, witness statements. She moved like water fluid, unstoppable. Behind her calm was a history of fighting battles others feared to name. And then came the surprise. A letter arrived, handwritten, postmarked Atlanta. My name is Eric Hanlon. I'm the judge's son, and I want to speak. They flew him in quietly. No cameras, no leaks, just a room in the eyes on justice office, a coffee pot, and 3 folding chairs. Eric was in his 30s, dressed plainly, his eyes tired. I grew up with a father who only saw the world in winners and criminals. There was no gray, no mercy. He paused. I used to believe him. He took out a USB. These are recordings, phone calls, dictations, things he said in private. I saved them because I knew one day I'd need to prove I wasn't like him. Lisa pressed play. The room filled with the judge's voice. Cruel, cold, racial slurs laced into sentences, bragging about how he cleaned the streets and put them where they belonged. Harold's jaw clenched. Elijah closed his eyes. This changes everything, Lisa whispered. They prepared their next move, a formal petition to strip Judge Hanlon of all judicial honors and open a federal investigation into his cases. They knew it would escalate. That week, Elijah received a death threat. Then another. His mother begged him to stop. Baby, I can't lose you. I'm not doing this to be seen, Elijah said. I'm doing this so others don't disappear. He started wearing a vest. Eyes on Justice installed cameras. Still, the meetings didn't stop. The data kept pouring in. So did the people. A retired police officer confessed. A prosecutor admitted to knowing. The web expanded. And then the headline broke. Federal review of Judge Hanlon's courtroom opens following whistleblower tapes. The old bell in the courthouse tower, silent for decades, was rung by a group of high schoolers at dawn. No one stopped them. Some people cried. Others prayed. But all listened. The sound was heavy, haunting, beautiful. It echoed far beyond the bricks and mortar, because finally, justice wasn't just whispered. It rang. The morning the indictment came. The sun burned hot over Georgia's soil, like the land itself was watching. Elijah was up early. He brewed coffee, not out of habit, but necessity. He hadn't slept much since the tapes were released. He watched the sunlight stretch over his porch and tried to steady the quake in his stomach. Lisa called. "It's happening." Press conference at noon. Doge is moving forward. He didn't cry. Not then. There wasn't time. Across town, Judge Hanlon was arrested. No cameras, no statements. Just a soft thud of a door opening and a man no longer untouchable stepping into the back of a government sedan. The image spread like wildfire anyway. Someone had snapped a photo. It showed him looking smaller than anyone remembered. Elijah saw it and felt nothing. No joy, no triumph. Just a strange, sobering quiet. The trial became a spectacle, but not the kind with fireworks. This was slow, meticulous. Testimonies played like symphonies of suffering. Curtis took the stand. So did former prosecutors. So did Eric Hanlon. Elijah wasn't called to testify, but his presence, front row, was thunder enough. Lisa delivered closing arguments for the coalition. What we do today doesn't undo the past, but it prevents the next child from becoming another file in a drawer, another name we whisper at night. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Guilty. On all counts. After the verdict, the town didn't celebrate. They gathered. A vigil formed outside the courthouse. Not of anger, but reverence. Survivors brought candles, photographs, case files. Children held up signs. "I am not a threat. I am a child." Lisa, Elijah, and Harold stood shoulder to shoulder. Harold leaned in. "You think this is what change feels like?" Elijah looked at the courthouse steps, where young people sat with sketchpads, where old women prayed aloud. "No," he said. "Change doesn't feel like one thing. It feels like everything breaking and then choosing what gets rebuilt." Months passed. A new judge was appointed. The murals outside the courthouse were preserved by the city. Lisa was offered a role in the State Commission on Legal Reform. Harold launched a Center for Data Justice. Elijah started teaching. Not law, literature. He read Baldwin, Morrison, Hughes. He taught his students how to write their names and mean them. On the anniversary of the indictment, the bell rang again. Not just by students. This time, it was Elijah. He pulled the rope with both hands. Each clang echoed like a memory answered. 1,000-foot-tall confession. The town listened. The country noticed. Because when the bell rings twice, it doesn't just announce justice. It remembers injustice too. And in that memory, something holy grows.